The Economist.
This has been a nail-biting time to be a finance minister in Europe. Christine Lagarde holds that job in France, which has put her at the centre of efforts to deal with the Greek debt crisis and to draw up rules to try to make sure nothing similar happens again. To find out more, we met her for tea in her office in Paris.
Let me start by asking you a very simple question, or at least a question that appears simple to most people outside France, but it seems to cause some sort of sensitivity inside France. Does France have an austerity programme, or what you would call a plan de rigueur?
We have a plan which is twofold. On the one hand, you have reduction of deficit, sustainability of debt. And on the other hand, we need to continue to stimulate innovation and investment. So it's a very balanced plan, but clearly deficit reduction, debt sustainability are de rigueur.
So you would use that phrase to describe the French austerity plan. It's a plan de rigueur.
No, I would say, we all fuss about whether to use it or not to use it. What is clear is that we have to reduce our deficit and we have to make sure that our long-term debt is sustainable.
Well, let me ask you exactly about how you're going to cut the deficit. You've undertaken to cut it from 8% in 2010 to 3% by 2013.
Yeah.
Now that implies either very drastic spending cuts or increases in taxes. What's the plan? Which of those are you going to apply?
We're going to apply the first one, which is a massive cut in public spendings. We are determined to deliver the 3% in 2013, and we will do what it takes. What we will focus on primarily is, number one, cut those expenses that are operational expenses. And the Prime Minister and the President, of course, have both indicated that it was a 10% cut across the board in operational expenses, as well as in grants and subsidies within 3 years, with a front-loading of 5% during the first year. In addition to that, there will be natural spending cuts that will be the result of the stimulus package being removed in 2011. Third measure is added collections and revenue, simply because growth has come back. And finally, as I mentioned, there are tax loopholes that have been provided over time, which will need to be either completely eliminated or significantly reduced. And we will do that. It's a commitment of the President, it's an undertaking by the Prime Minister. We have already spent quite a bit of time with my colleague from the budget to target those loopholes that will have to go, and we will continue doing that throughout the summer. We will present the whole budget in September to the Parliament, to the Finance Commission, and from there on it will be a parliamentary discussion where we are told by the Prime Minister and certainly by the President to be extremely firm.
Over the last 30 years, no French government has actually managed to balance a budget.
Correct.
What reason is there to believe that France now can undertake such a drastic deficit reduction?
Various things. Political determination at the top. The President is determined to deliver on that commitment. Second, what we call the Greek syndrome. Nobody wants to be in the position of Greece, having to submit a plan under such constraints and with so much scrutiny and supervision from external players, such as the Commission, such as the IMF. We don't want that. We'd rather have our own deficit-cutting plan. Thank you very much. And the commitment to our European partners. We have to do it. We said we would do it. We have to deliver.
Let me move on to the Eurozone. You earlier this year criticised Germany for not doing enough to stimulate demand. Subsequently, Germany introduced its own austerity package. What is your reaction to that German decision? And do you still stand by your views about demand?
Well, it's a matter that I discussed with my colleague, Wolfgang Schäuble. And in his own analysis of German psyche and German expectations, he's proving me right, because he says, and that's his analysis, and I have every reason to respect his analysis because he knows better the German psyche. He says if we have very stable, secure public finance, the German population, which is an aging population and a rather attentive population, will feel reassured, will save less, because it will feel confident that the state is looking after public finances, and therefore it will consume more.
You've also been talking to him about ways in which to reinforce the Stability Pact.
Yep.
And you putting together joint proposals to put to Herman Van Rompuy.
Yep.
What sort of sanctions, for example, could really be envisaged for offenders under new, more reinforced rules? Some of the options that are on the table are quite drastic, including removing voting rights. Are you prepared to go down that route? And if so, can you envisage such sanctions ever being applied, for example, to France?
We have proposed a joint paper to Herman Van Rompuy, the President of the European Council, as well as the leader of the task force, to reinforce European government and propose better ways to organize ourselves. And we have a preventive chapter and we have a sanction chapter. You're asking about the sanctions. What did we see with Greece? Too slow, not strong enough, not demanding, not enough discipline. So we're saying it has to be accelerated. Number two, let's organize for a deposit that a state would have to pay, an interest-bearing deposit, so that it is tangible and it's associated with actual money for those offending states that move too slowly on fixing their deficit objectives. Number three, let's look at the European budget. There are cohesion funds, there are structural funds. Well, let's have a look at those funds and see whether they should not be used to incentivize states to comply with their commitment to respect the Stability and Growth Pact. And finally, and that's the sort of the political chapter in the sanction book, let's have a look at political sanctions. In other words, if a state is delinquent, why wouldn't we agree that that state will be deprived from its voting rights? Now, that requires a treaty change, unless it is adopted voluntarily. And we might well imagine a situation where within the Eurozone, because we share that single currency, the euro, which we care for and wants to see as stable and secure as possible, why don't we have voluntary agreement along those lines? That's a suggestion.
So you would be happy to go along with the suspension of voting rights as a potential political sanction if it didn't involve treaty change. Is that right?
Well, even if it did involve treaty change, if and when the time comes for a treaty change, then it could be part of it. But we could very well consider within the Eurozone, and that is obviously subject to a voluntary enforcement of that sanction, we could have it within the Eurozone. There is an article in the treaty which is 136, under which you can actually have sort of improved cooperation arrangements within the Eurozone. Why not?
Two more questions. One is about the European bank stress tests, which are going to be published Friday at 6 o'clock Paris time. Are you confident? Is there anything you can say ahead of their publication about what they're going to say about French banks' exposure and whether or not this is going to be enough to calm the markets that have been quite unsettled?
All I will say is that, number one, as far as my banks are concerned, the French banks, I'm very confident about the results. And number two, and probably more importantly, from what I've seen of the criterias and the kind of tests that are applied to the 91 banks in Europe it's a very tough standard that is applied. And I'm saying that because I've seen here and there some, allegations, little hints, and various comments and analysts saying, "Oh, we're not so sure about the test." Well, let's go down to the details. The tests are really, really hard.
So hard that some will fail the test.
I'm not commenting, but all I can say is that I'm confident about French banks.
One last question. You've, as French finance minister, already broken recent records for having served as the longest finance minister, the first female finance minister, the first G8 female finance minister. Is it time for France to have another female prime minister?
It's up for the president to decide, and females can do the job. I'm sure there are other countries where it's happening. But as far as I'm concerned, if that's the question you ask me, I'm very, very happy with the job that I have to do. Thank you very much.
Christine Lagarde, thank you very much indeed.
Many Parisians have already left for their annual summer holidays, and Christine Lagarde assures us that she will also be taking a break. But with such fragile calm in the markets, that may be easier said than done.